Ronan squinted through the blinding snow, his scarf pulled tightly around his face as the storm clawed at him with icy fingers. The wind howled like a living thing, drowning out every sound but his own labored breaths. He kept moving, boots crunching against snow that seemed endless in every direction. The warmth of his cabin was miles away now, and he cursed himself for leaving it. But he had to know. The streak of fire he'd seen cut across the sky like a blazing comet couldn't be ignored. He'd watched it fall, descending rapidly until the horizon swallowed it. The collision had been distant, but even from his vantage point, he'd felt the faint tremor in the earth. He wasn't a soldier or a scientist, just a maintenance worker with a stubborn streak. But his instincts had screamed, something's wrong. Out here, alone on this frozen wasteland of a planet, that kind of curiosity could get you killed. He knew that. Yet he also knew the sinking feeling in his gut wouldn't let him rest. Not until he saw it with his own eyes. Ronan crested a ridge, his legs burning from the effort, and stopped. His heart pounded. Not from exertion, but from what lay before him. The object was no meteorite. A ship, sleek and alien in design, lay half buried in the snow. Smoke rose in thin tendrils from its jagged wounds, evidence of a violent descent. Its surface, once pristine, bore scorch marks and deep gashes where it had torn through the frozen terrain. He stood frozen for a moment, awe and unease battling within him. Alien ships weren't unheard of. Humanity had made first contact decades ago. But out here, in the middle of nowhere, it didn't make sense. "All right," he muttered under his breath, adjusting the pack on his shoulders. "Let's see what we've got." Sliding down the ridge, Ronan approached the wreckage cautiously. The air smelled faintly of burnt metal, sharp and acrid. The closer he got, the more details came into focus. Symbols, some alien language, ran along the hull, glowing faintly blue against the dull gray of the metal. A faint hum emanated from the ship, barely audible over the wind. Then he saw her. Slumped against the side of the ship, partially covered in snow, was a figure. For a moment, Ronan's brain struggled to process what he was looking at. She wasn't human, that much was obvious. Her skin, a shimmering shade of violet, seemed to catch and reflect the weak light of the storm. She wore a torn flight suit, its material embedded lights flickering erratically. "Shit," Ronan breathed, dropping to one knee beside her. She wasn't moving. He leaned closer, brushing snow from her face with trembling hands. Her features were striking. Sharp cheekbones, slightly elongated eyes that hinted at something otherworldly. But her lips were a worrying shade of blue, and her skin felt ice-cold under his gloves. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, searching for a pulse. It was faint, but it was... "Hey," he said, his voice rough from the cold. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, revealing golden irises that seemed to glow faintly. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out at first. Then she whispered something, her voice soft and melodic, but in a language he couldn't understand. "They save your energy," Ronan said, shaking his head. "I've got you." He shrugged off his insulated coat and wrapped it around her as best as he could. Her body was light, too light. As he scooped her up in his arms, she barely reacted, her head lolling against his chest. Her breath came in shallow bursts, each one weaker than the last. Ronan glanced at the ship, weighing his options. It was tempting to check for supplies or shelter inside, but the structure looked unstable. Smoke and sparks seeped from a jagged hole near its base, and a faint hissing sound warned him to keep his distance. He tightened his grip on the woman, no, the alien, and turned back toward the shelter he'd set up a few miles away. "Come on, don't quit on me," he muttered as he trudged through the snow. His muscles ached, his lungs burned, but he refused to stop. The wind tore at him, howling in protest, but he hunched forward and kept moving. The storm was getting worse, the world around him a swirling chaos of white. The prefab shelter came into view just as his strength began to falter. It was small, barely more than a metal box with a heating unit, but it was enough. Ronan kicked open the door and stumbled inside, nearly dropping her as he did. He set her down on the thin mattress and worked quickly to seal the door against the storm. The temperature inside was marginally better, but still far too cold for someone in her condition. He grabbed a thermal blanket from his supplies and wrapped it tightly around her, then activated the portable heater. Her shivering hadn't stopped, and her lips were still alarmingly blue. Ronan crouched beside her, his mind racing. He placed a hand on her forehead. It was like touching ice. She wasn't warming up fast enough. "Bien ray," he muttered, peeling off his gloves and boots. "This is probably a terrible idea, but desperate times." He stripped down to his base layers and slid under the blanket beside her, pressing his body against hers. Her skin was so cold it made him flinch, but he forced himself to stay close, wrapping his arms around her. He could feel her shallow breaths against his chest, a fragile rhythm that he clung to. "Come on," he whispered. "Fight. Don't let this beat you." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, her shivering began to ease. Her breathing deepened, and her head shifted slightly, pressing against his shoulder. Her fingers, still ice-cold, curled weakly against his chest. Ronan let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Relief washed over him, but it was tinged with worry. Whoever she was, whatever had brought her here, she was still in danger. As the storm roared outside, Ronan tightened his hold on her and stared at the alien ship in the distance, its faint blue lights flickering like dying embers. Something told him this was just the beginning. The storm outside roared with unrelenting ferocity, slamming against the prefab shelter like a relentless predator testing its prey. Inside, Ronan leaned back against the metal wall, the weight of exhaustion pressing on him. His arms encircled the alien woman, Xvara, whose cold body had finally begun to warm under the shared heat of his. The faint rise and fall of her chest reassured him, though each breath she took was shallow, uneven. He glanced down at her face, its violet hue more vibrant now than before. Her features were sharper than any human's, her cheekbones high and angular, her golden irises glowing faintly even when her eyes were closed. She was stunning, yet fragile in a way that tugged at something deep in Ronan's chest. His thoughts wandered as he studied her. How had he ended up here, risking his life for a complete stranger? He knew the answer, though he rarely let himself think about it. A part of him still carried the ghosts of the past, the accident that had cost lives, the guilt that had driven him to this frozen world. He had come here to escape the weight of responsibility, but now it felt like the universe had thrown him back into it. A faint rustle pulled him from his thoughts. Xvara stirred, her head shifting against his shoulder. Her eyelids fluttered open, revealing those piercing golden eyes. For a moment, she just stared at him, her expression a mixture of confusion and wariness. "You're awake," Ronan said softly, trying not to startle her. "How are you feeling?" Xvara blinked slowly, her voice hoarse but clear. "Human." Her word caught him off guard. He tilted his head. "You know what I am?" "Yes," she rasped, her accent melodic yet unfamiliar. She struggled to push herself up, her movements weak but deliberate. Ronan helped her sit against the wall, though her body remained unsteady. "You're kind, known, observed." "Well, that's not unsettling at all," Ronan muttered, crossing his arms. "Do you guys have a database of us or something?" Xvara didn't respond immediately. Her gaze moved around the cramped shelter, taking in the sparse supplies, the humming heater, and the weathered tools stacked in one corner. Finally, her eyes settled back on him. "This, your dwelling?" "Temporary," Ronan said. "I live a few miles from here. This is for emergencies." He hesitated, then added, "And you?" "Ah, qualified as an emergency." Her lips curved faintly, almost a smile. "You saved me." "Yeah, well," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "You were freezing to death. Didn't feel like leaving you out there was an option." "Wait?" she asked, tilting her head. The question held no accusation, only curiosity. "You had no reason to." Ronan opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. Why had he done it? He could have ignored the crash, stayed in his cabin where it was safe. But something about the fireball streaking across the sky had sparked a part of him he'd thought was long buried. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said finally, his tone quieter. "And I guess I know what it's like to feel alone." Xvara studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she winced, her hand moving to her ribs. "You're hurt," Ronan said, leaning forward. "No," she interrupted, her voice sharp despite its weakness. Her hand brushed the fabric of her suit, activating a hidden panel on her wrist. Blue holographic symbols appeared, shifting and rearranging as she worked quickly. The hum of alien technology filled the room, soft but distinct. Ronan leaned back, wary. "What's that?" "To diagnostics," she said, her focus never wavering. Her fingers danced across the interface, the glowing symbols responding to her touch. The hum grew louder for a moment, then stopped abruptly. The hologram vanished, and Zavara sagged against the wall, her breathing ragged. "Your suit's damaged, isn't it?" Ronan asked. "Yes," she admitted, "it provides protection, life support. But its systems are failing. Can you fix it?" "Not here," she said, her voice tight. "I require my ship. And time." Ronan frowned, his mind racing. He glanced toward the shelter door, where the storm continued its relentless assault. "Your ship's in bad shape," he said, "and I don't know if you've noticed, but the weather here isn't exactly repair-friendly." "I don't have a choice," she replied. Her tone was calm, but the weight behind her words was undeniable. "If the suit fails completely, I will not survive." Before Ronan could respond, Zavara's gaze shifted, her expression darkening. "But the ship is not the only danger." "What do you mean?" Ronan asked. Zavara hesitated, as if weighing how much to tell him. Then she said, "Raiders." The word sent a chill down Ronan's spine. "Raiders? Like space pirates?" "Yes," she said, her golden eyes locking onto his. "They ambushed me, forced my ship down. They will follow." "Follow?" His stomach sank. "You're saying they're coming here?" Zavara nodded grimly. "My ship emits a signal. They will track it." Ronan swore under his breath, running a hand through his hair. The cozy isolation of his life had just been shattered by the prospect of alien marauders descending on his quiet little corner of the galaxy. "How long do we have?" "I don't know," Zavara said. "But we must prepare." Ronan stared at her, his mind spinning. He had no weapons, no plan, and no idea how to deal with raiders from another world. But as he looked at Zavara, pale and bruised but still defiant, he felt a strange resolve settle over him. He wasn't about to let her face this alone. "All right," he said, his voice firm. "We'll figure something out, together." Zavara's expression softened slightly, though her eyes still held doubt. "You risk much, Ronan." "Story of my life," he muttered. The storm outside raged on, but inside the shelter a different kind of storm was brewing, one far more dangerous than the snow. The storm had subsided by morning, leaving behind a landscape of pristine, blinding white. Ronan stepped outside the shelter, his breath clouding the frigid air. His boots crunched against the packed snow as he scanned the horizon. The wreckage of Zavara's ship was still visible in the distance, a dark, jagged scar on the icy plain. It looked even worse now, crumpled and lifeless, like some great beast felled in battle. He hated to admit it, but there was no way she could fix it out here, not in this weather, not without proper tools. He turned back toward the shelter, only to find Zavara standing in the doorway. She leaned heavily against the frame, her violet skin pale under the weak sunlight. The thermal blanket draped around her shoulders made her appear fragile, but her golden eyes gleamed with determination. "You shouldn't be up," Ronan said, walking back toward her. "You need to rest." Zavara straightened, though she winced at the effort. "Rest will not save me, Ronan. Action will." He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I get it. You're on a clock. But you can't just push through an injury like this. You'll burn out before we get anything done." "I have endured worse," she said quietly. "But you are correct. I cannot do this alone." Ronan gestured toward the horizon. "Your ship's in bad shape. Even if we get out there, how do you plan to fix it? Do you have tools, spare parts, anything?" Zavara hesitated, her gaze dropping to the snow. "The ship's systems are modular," she said finally. "If I can reach the core, I can reroute power to the suit and suppress the signal." "Suppress the signal?" Ronan frowned. "I thought you needed the ship to fix your suit." "I do," she said, her tone clipped. "But more urgently, the signal must be silenced. If the raiders trace it here, they will kill us both. And if they seize the technology aboard my vessel, countless lives will be at risk." Ronan stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "What kind of tech are we talking about?" "Advanced?" Zavara said, choosing her words carefully. Weapons, data, tools my people do not wish to see in violent hands. Oh, not just your average crash-and-grab operation, Ronan muttered. He glanced back toward the horizon, weighing their options. We'll need to move fast. The ship's not far, but dragging tools and supplies through that snow will slow us down. Zavara nodded. We cannot delay. I will accompany you. Not a chance, Ronan said firmly. You're barely standing. If you collapse halfway there, I'm screwed. Her golden eyes narrowed, and for a moment she looked ready to argue. But then she stepped aside, letting him pass into the shelter. You will need my guidance, she said, her voice softer. The ship's systems are not intuitive. Ronan smirked despite himself. Yeah, I figured alien tech wouldn't come with a user manual. Inside the shelter, he packed quickly, loading his bag with anything that might prove useful, multi-tunnel wiring kits, thermal packs. Zavara watched him, leaning against the wall for support. You act with confidence, she said, her tone almost curious. Have you faced danger before? Ronan paused, glancing over his shoulder. Something like that. Her gaze lingered on him, sharp and probing, but she didn't press further. Instead, she said, You are different from what I expected of your kind. And what exactly were you expecting? He asked, shoving another thermal pack into his bag. She hesitated, her expression softening. Self-preservation. Hesitation. You risk much for a stranger. Ronan slung the bag over his shoulder and met her gaze. Maybe I'm just bad at staying out of trouble. Zavara tilted her head, studying him with a faint smile. Perhaps. The trek to the wreckage was grueling, even with the storm past. The snow clung to Ronan's boots, each step a battle against the icy terrain. Zavara walked beside him, slower than him but resolute, her movements stiff from pain. Ronan had offered to carry her once, but the look she gave him made it clear that suggestion wouldn't end well for him. When they finally reached the ship, it looked even worse up close. Smoke still rose from its ruptured hull, and one wing jutted awkwardly from the snow like a broken limb. The symbols on its surface, glowing faintly blue, pulsed erratically as though the ship were clinging to life. Zavara moved toward the open hatch, her steps faltering as she climbed the crumpled metal. Ronan reached out to steady her, but she shook her head. I am fine. Sure you are, he muttered, following her inside. The interior was dim and chaotic, the walls scarred from the crash. Broken conduits sparked faintly and shards of alien glass crunched underfoot. Ronan wrinkled his nose at the acrid smell of burnt circuitry. Zavara knelt beside a console, her fingers brushing over the shattered interface. The core is below, she said. We must reach it. Lead the way, Ronan said, scanning their surroundings. But let's hurry. I don't like how exposed this place feels. As if on cue, a distant rumble echoed through the wreckage. Zavara froze, her golden eyes widening. That is not the storm. Ronan turned toward the sound, his gut twisting. A shadow passed over the open hatch, followed by another rumble, closer this time. They found us, Zavara whispered. Ronan's hand tightened around the multi-tool strapped to his belt, the cold metal a poor substitute for a weapon. How many? Zavara didn't answer immediately, her eyes closed, her brow furrowed in concentration. When she spoke, her voice was tight. 3. Maybe more. Perfect, Ronan muttered. He glanced around the ruined ship, searching for anything that could be used to defend them. His eyes landed on a metal rod, jagged at one end, and he grabbed it. We need to move. Now. Zavara rose unsteadily, her hand clutching the edge of the console. If I can reach the core, I can disable the signal, but it will take time. Time we don't have, Ronan said. He stepped in front of her, gripping the makeshift weapon. Stay behind me. If they get in, let me handle it. You would fight them? Zavara's voice was incredulous. You stand no chance. Ronan smirked, though the knot in his stomach betrayed his nerves. Never said it was a good plan. Another rumble shook the ship, and this time a guttural voice called out from the entrance. Ronan didn't understand the words, but the tone was unmistakable. A threat. Zavara's hand brushed his arm, drawing his attention. Her expression was solemn. Do not throw your life away, Ronan. You are more valuable than you realize. Ronan swallowed hard, nodding. Just get that signal down. I'll buy you as much time as I can. As the first shadow moved into the ship, he gripped the metal rod tighter, his heart pounding. Whatever came next, he was ready to meet it head-on. The ship groaned like a dying animal, its metal shell vibrating as the tremor shook through it. Ronan pressed himself against the wall, gripping the jagged rod in his hand so tightly his knuckles whitened. Zyvara stood a few feet away, her violet skin pallid under the flickering light of the console. Her golden eyes darted toward him, calm but sharp, betraying the tension beneath her controlled demeanor. "They are here," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. Ronan swallowed hard, his heart pounding against his ribs. The distant rumble of engines grew louder, each moment eroding what little time they had left. He took a step closer to her, lowering his voice. "How many are we talking about?" "2 ships," Zyvara replied, her hands flying over the console as she worked to disable the signal. "Perhaps 6 or 7 raiders, depending on their crews." 6 or 7, Ronan muttered, shaking his head. "Perfect. Just a small army." "Payment will not stop," she added, her gaze still fixed on the interface. "The technology aboard this vessel is too valuable." "Yeah, you mentioned that. Care to elaborate? What's so special about this ship?" Zyvara hesitated, her fingers pausing mid-swipe. Her golden eyes flicked to him, and for a moment her mask of composure cracked. "It is not only the ship. It is what I carry." "Clarified to carry," Ronan repeated, narrowing his eyes. "You mean something you brought on board?" She nodded once, her expression grim. "A prototype. It was meant to advance exploration and communication across galaxies. But in the wrong hands, it could be weaponized." She looked back at the console, her voice softening. "My people would never allow it. Yet, here I am, proving their fears correct." Ronan stared at her, the weight of her words settling on him like the cold outside. "You're saying these guys could turn it into a galactic nuke or something?" "Or something," Zyvara said, her voice clipped, "which is why we cannot let them take it." Ronan rubbed the back of his neck, muttering to himself. I thought I was signing up for a quiet life." The engines outside roared louder, the sound now unmistakably close. Zyvara's hands moved faster, her focus unyielding as the console emitted faint flashes of light. Ronan turned toward the gaping hole in the ship's hull, his eyes scanning the snow beyond. The horizon was empty, save for the gray sky and endless white, but the sound of approaching raiders was unmistakable. They were circling like predators, waiting for the right moment to strike. "We're out of time," Ronan said, his voice sharp. He turned back to Zyvara. "Can you finish whatever you're doing?" "The beacon will be disabled soon," she replied, "but the power reroute, it will take longer." Ronan cursed under his breath. "How long?" Zyvara didn't answer. Her silence was enough. The first raider ship appeared on the horizon, a sleek, angular craft that looked more like a predator than a machine. Its dark hull gleamed under the weak sunlight, and its engines emitted a low, menacing hum. A second ship followed, smaller but no less intimidating, its cannons swiveling as it scanned the area. They hovered in place for a moment, as if assessing the wreckage, then began to descend. Ronan gritted his teeth. "They're landing." Zyvara glanced at him, her hands still moving over the console. "You must delay them." "Right," he said, forcing a tight grin, because that worked so well last time. She didn't respond, her focus already back on the console. Ronan exhaled, gripping the metal rod in his hand. His mind raced as he scanned the room for anything he could use. His eyes landed on a loose cable, sparking faintly near the wall. An idea flickered to life. "Can I use that?" he asked, pointing to the cable. Zyvara glanced at it briefly. "If you can draw them into range, it will discharge a lethal current." "Good enough," Ronan said. He moved quickly, dragging the cable closer to the entrance and testing its length. It sparked dangerously, the electric charge humming in the air. He positioned himself near the door, his makeshift weapon in one hand and the cable in the other. The sound of footsteps crunching against snow reached his ears. The raiders were here. The first figure stepped through the hull's opening, a hulking brute of a raider, clad in armor that looked like it had been scavenged from a dozen different battles. Its weapon, a sleek, glowing plasma rifle, hummed ominously as it scanned the room. The raider's reptilian face twisted into a sneer when it saw Ronan. "You again," the reader said, its voice a low growl. "Foolish human." "Yaw well," Ronan said, forcing a smirk. "I've been called worse." The raider raised its weapon, but Ronan didn't wait. He swung the cable forward, the sparking end arcing through the air like a whip. It connected with the raider's chest, sending a jolt of electricity surging through its body. The alien convulsed violently, its weapon clattering to the floor before it collapsed in a smoking heap. "That's one," Ronan muttered, stepping back. More figures appeared in the doorway, 3 this time, their weapons drawn. Ronan's smirk faded. "Okay, this might be a problem." The first raider fired, a plasma bolt slamming into the wall beside him. Ronan ducked, rolling behind a console as more shots tore through the room. Sparks flew, and the acrid smell of burning metal filled the air. He peeked out from cover, his mind racing. "Zabara," he shouted, "any time now." "I am close," she called back, her voice steady but tense. "Hold them off a little longer." "Sure," Ronan muttered, "no pressure." One of the raiders moved closer, its heavy boots clanging against the ship's floor. Ronan waited until it was nearly on top of him, then surged forward, driving the jagged end of his rod into the alien's side. The raider let out a guttural cry, staggering back as green blood seeped from the wound. The other 2 raiders turned their weapons on him, and Ronan dove back into cover, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was outmatched, and he knew it. But he also knew he didn't have a choice. The ship's lights flickered suddenly, and a low hum filled the room. Zavara straightened, her golden eyes blazing. "The signal is down." "Great," Ronan said. "Now get us out of here." Zavara moved quickly, her fingers activating another sequence on the console. The hum grew louder, the ship's systems flickering to life. The raiders hesitated, their eyes darting around as the environment shifted. "What are you doing?" Ronan asked, his voice edged with urgency. "Overloading the core," Zavara said, her tone calm. "It will collapse the structure." Ronan stared at her, realization dawning. "You're blowing the ship?" "It is the only way," she said. "If the raiders take what is here, more will follow." The ground beneath them trembled, and the hum grew deafening. The raiders, sensing the danger, began to retreat, but Ronan stayed rooted to the spot, his mind racing. "Ronan," Zavara said, stepping toward him, "we must go." He nodded, his grip tightening on her arm as they ran for the exit. Behind them, the ship's core began to glow, a blinding light consuming the wreckage. The raiders scrambled to escape, their shouts drowned out by the rising roar. Ronan and Zavara merged into the cold, stumbling into the snow just as the ship erupted in a plume of light and fire. The force of the blast knocked them to the ground, and Ronan shielded Zavara with his body as debris rained around them. When the chaos finally subsided, Ronan rolled onto his back, staring up at the gray sky. His chest heaved, his body aching, but he was alive. Beside him, Zavara sat up slowly, her golden eyes scanning the horizon. "They will come again," she said softly. Ronan exhaled, his breath visible in the cold air. "Then we'll be ready." The glow of the fire flickered across the icy walls of the cavern Ronan and Zavara had found as temporary shelter. The explosion from her ship had scorched the horizon, leaving no sign of the raiders. At least for now. But neither of them dared to speak of safety. This was only a reprieve. Ronan crouched near the fire, feeding it scraps of dry fuel from his pack. The warmth soaked into his skin, banishing the chill that clung stubbornly to his bones. Across from him, Zavara leaned against the cavern wall, her eyes half closed. Her silvery hair reflected the firelight, and her violet skin had regained some of its radiance. But the exhaustion, etched into her features, was impossible to ignore. "How's the suit holding up?" Ronan asked, breaking the silence. She opened her eyes, the golden orbs catching the firelight like molten metal. "Functional, but weakened. The power reroute was a temporary measure. It will not sustain me indefinitely." Ronan leaned back, resting his elbows on his knees. "We'll figure something out. We always do, right?" "You assume we have time to figure anything out?" Her voice carried no malice, only weariness. He frowned, poking at the fire with a stick. Look, I know it's bad, but you're still here. That counts for something. She studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. You are different, Ronan. Different? How? He raised an eyebrow, trying to sound casual, though her tone made his chest tighten. You lack the cold calculation I expected from your kind, she said softly. You act not from logic, but from instinct. Emotion. Ronan let out a dry laugh. That's a nice way of saying I don't think things through. Perhaps, she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. But it is also why I am alive. Their eyes met across the fire, the space between them shrinking despite the physical distance. Ronan felt his pulse quicken under her steady gaze. He looked away, focusing on the fire as if it held all the answers. You make it sound like I'm some kind of hero, he said, his voice quieter now. Trust me, I'm not. Zavara tilted her head, studying him. You doubt yourself. Ronan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he pulled a flask from his pack, unscrewed the cap, and took a long swig. The liquid burned on the way down, but it wasn't enough to drown the knot in his chest. You don't know me, he said finally, his voice low. You don't know what I've done. Then tell me, she said simply. He glanced at her, caught off guard by the directness of her reply. Her gaze was steady, unflinching, as if she could see straight through him. He wanted to brush her off, make some joke to deflect the weight of her question, but the vulnerability in her eyes stopped him. She wasn't asking out of curiosity. She was asking because she cared. Ronan sighed, running a hand through his hair. There was an accident, he said. A long time ago. I was working on an orbital station. Small crew, tight quarters. One day something went wrong. An engineering failure. It should have been an easy fix, but I missed something. Made a mistake. He swallowed hard, his throat tightening. People died because of me. Good people. And instead of facing it, I ran. Ended up here. Thinking I could bury it all under snow and silence. Zara didn't speak right away, and the quiet stretched between them like a chasm. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost tender. You blame yourself. Of course I do, Ronan said, his tone sharper than he intended. He shook his head. What kind of person just moves on from something like that? Ardent who chooses to keep living, she said. Her words were simple, but they struck him like a blow. You are not defined by a single mistake, Ronan. You saved me. Does that not count for something? He looked at her, the sincerity in her expression catching him off guard. For a moment he didn't know what to say. Then he laughed, though it was tinged with bitterness. You're too good at this, you know. The whole wise alien thing. Her smile widened slightly, but it didn't reach her eyes. And you are too hard on yourself. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy with unspoken thoughts, with the weight of things neither of them knew how to say. Ronan watched her across the fire, his heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Deborah, he said, his voice quieter now, you've been through hell too. You lost your ship, your mission, and you're stuck here with me. Why haven't you given up? She tilted her head, her silvery hair falling over her shoulder. Because I still breathe. As long as there is breath, there is hope. Her words were simple, but the conviction behind them was unshakable. Ronan felt a lump rise in his throat, and he looked away, embarrassed by the sudden rush of emotion. When he glanced back, she was closer. She had moved around the fire without him noticing, and now she knelt beside him, her golden eyes locked onto his. Her presence was magnetic, drawing him in despite the warning bells in his head. He could feel the heat radiating from her, mingling with the fire's warmth. You saved me, she said again, her voice softer this time. You gave me hope. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. Before he could gather his thoughts, she reached out, her hand brushing against his. Her touch was light, but it sent a jolt through him, as if her skin carried some faint electric current. Zavara, he began, but his voice faltered. She leaned closer, her eyes searching his. You do not have to carry your guilt alone, Ronan. Her words broke something inside him. Without thinking, he reached up, cupping her face in his hand. Her skin was warm now, the cold of the storm long gone, and the softness of her features made his chest tighten. For a moment neither of them moved. The fire crackled softly beside them, the only sound in the cavern. Then, slowly, she leaned in, her forehead resting against his, her breath mingled with his, warm and steady, and he closed his eyes, letting the moment envelop them. When their lips met, it was hesitant at first, a quiet question rather than an answer. Her kiss was softer than he expected, but there was a quiet intensity beneath it, a depth that left him breathless. He pulled her closer, his hand moving to the small of her back, and she responded in kind, her fingers tangling in his hair. Time seemed to blur, the weight of their shared pain melting away in the heat between them. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ronan wasn't running, wasn't hiding. He was simply there, with her, and that was enough. When they finally broke apart, her forehead rested against his once more, her golden eyes met his, and she smiled. A real, unguarded smile that made his heart ache in the best way. "You are stronger than you believe, Ronan," she said softly. "And you're braver than you let on," he replied. She laughed quietly, the sound like a melody, and they stayed like that for a while, the fire crackling beside them, the storm outside forgotten. The cavern had grown colder as the hours passed, the fire reduced to a weak flicker. Ronan and Zyvara sat together, their backs against the rough stone wall, the tension between them now a quiet understanding. Outside, the storm had finally abated, leaving the world silent but no less dangerous. The lingering threat of raiders was a shadow that neither could ignore. Ronan stretched his legs, the stiffness in his muscles a dull reminder of the recent fight. "We can't stay here forever," he said, his voice low. "They'll regroup, come back stronger." Zyvara nodded, her golden eyes fixed on the cave's entrance. "The beacon may be gone, but they will search for me. My kind's technology is too valuable to them." Ronan sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. "Any chance your people might come looking for you?" She hesitated, her expression guarded. "Perhaps, but I am far from my designated route. My people prefer calculated risks. I was sent because I was expendable." Ronan turned to her, his jaw tightening. "Expendable? You're a scientist. You're carrying technology that could shift the balance of power in the galaxy. How does that make you expendable?" Her gaze softened. "My mission was exploratory. My survival, while preferable, was not essential. It is the way of my kind. We value the greater whole above the individual." "Well, that's a load of crap," Ronan said bluntly. "You're not expendable, not to me." Zyvara's eyes widened slightly, the vulnerability in her expression catching him off guard. "Your kind places great value on individuals. I see that now. It is admirable." "Yeah, well," Ronan muttered, kicking at a loose stone. "Doesn't always work out, but it beats throwing people away like spare parts." A faint rumble interrupted their conversation. Ronan froze, his ears straining to identify the source. Zyvara stiffened beside him, her body taut with alertness. "They're coming," she said quietly. "I can feel it." Rana grabbed his bag, checking the meager supplies they had left. "We need to move. The cavern's a death trap if they box us in." Zyvara stood, her movements deliberate despite her weariness. "The storm has passed. We must reach higher ground. Visibility will give us an advantage." Ronan nodded, slinging the bag over his shoulder. "Let's hope your people show up sooner rather than later." As they stepped outside, the icy wind cut through them like a blade, but the clear sky revealed the barren landscape stretching in all directions. The remains of Zyvara's ship were barely visible now, a charred wreck buried beneath the snow. The horizon, however, held a far more ominous sight. Two black ships, circling like vultures, their engines emitting an eerie hum that carried through the cold air. It called. "They're searching," Zyvara said, her voice tight. "They know I survived." Ronan clenched his fists. "Then let's make it hard for them." They began to climb the rocky outcrop that loomed over the valley. The ascent was brutal, the frozen ground slick and unforgiving, but they pressed on. Ronan moved ahead, offering Zyvara's hand when the path grew treacherous. She hesitated each time, her pride flickering behind her guarded expression, but she took his help without complaint. As they reached the summit, the sound of engines grew louder. One of the ships had spotted them, its sleek form cutting through the air like a predator locking onto prey. "They've seen us," Ronan said. his breath visible in the freezing air. "We need a plan." Zavara's gaze darted across the terrain, assessing their options. "If we can disable one ship, the others may retreat. Their forces rely on intimidation, not resilience." "And how exactly do we pull that off?" Ronan asked, gesturing at the vast emptiness around them. "We don't exactly have a stockpile of weapons." Zavara reached into her suit and retrieved a small metallic device. It fit in the palm of her hand, its surface etched with glowing symbols. "This is a disruptor," she explained. "Short range but effective. If we can lure one ship close enough, I can disable its systems." Ronan stared at the device, his mind racing. "And the other ship?" "We use its confusion to escape," she said, simply. Ronan chuckled humorlessly. "Right, sounds easy enough." The circling ship grew larger as it descended, its cannon swiveling toward their position. Ronan's pulse quickened as he looked at Zavara. "How close does it need to be?" "Within 30 meters, she said, her voice calm despite the danger. "Guess I'll handle that part," he muttered, gripping his makeshift weapon. "You stay out of sight." Zavara frowned. "You cannot face them alone." "I'm not planning to," Ronan said. "Just buying you the time you need." Before she could argue, the ship's cannons fired, sending a blast of snow and ice into the air. Ronan ducked, shielding his face as debris rained down. He turned to Zavara, shouting over the roar of the engines. "Go! Get into position!" She hesitated, but the urgency in his voice propelled her into action. She disappeared behind a rocky outcrop, the disruptor clutched tightly in her hand. The ship hovered closer, its sleek form casting a shadow over Ronan as it aimed another cannon blast. He darted to the side, sliding down the icy slope as the ground behind him erupted in an explosion of snow and rock. His heart pounded as he scrambled for cover, the ship's relentless pursuit driving him toward the edge of the cliff. "You want me?" he shouted, his voice echoing across the valley. "Come and get me!" The ship veered lower, its engines thrumming like an ominous heartbeat. Ronan spotted the faint glint of its cockpit and knew the pilot could see him. He moved again, leading the ship closer to the rocky outcrop where Zavara waited. "Now," he whispered under his breath, hoping she was ready. The ship slowed, hovering just above the ground. Ronan braced himself, gripping his rod like a lifeline. A sudden flash of light erupted from the rocks, followed by a high-pitched hum that sent a shiver down his spine. The disruptor activated. The ship's engines sputtered, their rhythmic pulse breaking into chaotic stutters. Sparks flew from its cannons as the craft began to tilt dangerously. Ronan dove out of the way as the ship crashed into the snow, its impact sending a shockwave that rattled the ground beneath him. Zavara emerged from her hiding place, her movements swift and purposeful. She approached the downed ship, her golden eyes scanning for any signs of life. Ronan followed, his breath coming in heavy bursts. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. "You actually did it." "There is no time to celebrate," Zavara said, her tone firm. "The second ship will investigate." As if on cue, the distant hum of the other ship grew louder. Ronan glanced at Zavara. "What now?" She looked at the fallen ship, her expression unreadable. "We take what we can and leave." "Quickly." Ronan nodded, following her into the wreckage. The interior was dim and chaotic, wires sparking and panels flickering. Zavara moved with precision, retrieving components and devices that Ronan couldn't even begin to identify. When they finally emerged, the sound of the second ship was deafening. Ronan turned to Zavara, his jaw set. "You go, I'll distract them." Her eyes widened. "You will not survive." "Maybe not," he said, gripping his rod, "but you will." "That's enough for me." Zavara stepped closer, her hand brushing against his arm. "I will not leave you behind." Ronan's chest tightened as he met her gaze. For a moment, the world around them seemed to fade, the noise of the approaching ship a distant echo. "We'll find a way," he said quietly. Together they turned toward the horizon, the odds stacked against them, but their resolve unbroken. The roar of the second ship grew deafening as it descended, its engines carving ripples through the snow. Ronan and Zavara stood side by side on the frozen ridge, their breath visible in the icy air. The wreckage of the first raider's ship smoldered behind them, a fleeting victory that had only bought them minutes. "They will not stop," Zyvara said, her golden eyes fixed on the approaching ship. "Their leader will demand retribution." "Then we make this count," Ronan said, gripping his makeshift weapon. "We've come this far." Zyvara glanced at him, her expression softening despite the chaos. "You surprise me, Ronan. I thought humans avoided impossible fights." He smirked, though his heart pounded. "We do. I just have a lousy sense of self-preservation." The second ship hovered over the ridge, its cannons trained on them. The craft's underside opened, and a ramp descended, revealing a figure clad in black armor, larger and more imposing than any raider they'd faced. The leader moved with predatory grace, their weapon raised, a faint hum emanating from its barrel. Ronan squared his shoulders, stepping forward. "What's the plan?" he whispered to Zyvara. Her voice was calm, resolute. "We end this. Together?" The leader spoke, their voice amplified by the ship's speakers. "You cannot win, Athari. Surrender and your death will be swift." Zyvara stepped forward, her chin raised. "You have already lost. The technology is gone." The leader laughed, a guttural sound that made Ronan's skin crawl. "Do you think me a fool? Your destruction will be a warning to those who defy us." Ronan tightened his grip on his weapon. "Yeah? I've got a warning for you too. Mess with us, and you'll end up like your friends back there." The leader's gaze shifted to Ronan, and their laughter ceased. "A human? Defending her? How quaint." Before Ronan could retort, Zyvara placed a hand on his arm, stopping him. "He is no ordinary human," she said, her voice clear. "And I am no defenseless prey." She raised the disruptor, its faint glow catching the leader's attention. They tilted their head, their weapon lowering slightly. "A bluff. You cannot disable this ship from here." Zyvara smiled, the first hint of satisfaction flickering across her face. "Not from here." A sharp whirring sound filled the air. Behind them, the smoldering wreckage of the first raider ship began to vibrate, its systems surging to life. Sparks flew and a low hum resonated across the ridge. The leader turned, their helmet tilting in confusion. "What have you done?" they demanded. Zyvara's gaze remained steady. "I redirected its remaining power. You came here for destruction. Allow me to oblige." The wreckage exploded in a blinding flash of light and fire. The shockwave slammed into the ridge, sending Ronan and Zyvara sprawling to the ground as the second ship reeled. Its engines sputtered, and smoke poured from its hull as it listed dangerously to one side. Ronan scrambled to his feet, pulling Zyvara up as the ship crashed into the snow, its cannons sparking uselessly. The leader staggered from the wreckage, their armor scorched, but they raised their weapon with a snarl. "Stay behind me," Ronan said, stepping in front of Zyvara. "No," she said firmly, pulling a blade of shimmering light from her suit. "We fight as one." The leader charged, their weapon firing erratic bursts of plasma. Ronan ducked, lunging forward to swing his rod at their arm. The impact knocked the weapon from their grasp, and Zyvara moved with precision, her blade slicing through the air. The leader blocked with their armored forearm, sparks flying as metal clashed against energy. The fight was brutal, a blur of movement and sound. Ronan fought with raw determination, his strikes aimed at every gap in the leader's armor, while Zyvara's movements were fluid and calculated, her blade a blur of light. Together they pressed the leader back, forcing them toward the smoldering remains of their ship. Finally, with one coordinated strike, Zyvara's blade pierced the leader's chest, and Ronan delivered a crushing blow to their helmet. The leader collapsed, their body falling heavily into the snow. Ronan leaned on his weapon, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "Please tell me that was the last one." Zyvara nodded, her own breathing unsteady. "It is over." He looked at her, his heart still racing. "You sure?" She met his gaze, her expression softening. "Yes. You saved me again." Ronan chuckled weakly. "I think it's mutual at this point." The silence that followed felt different, heavier, but not unwelcome. The battle was done, but the weight of what they had endured lingered. Ronan turned to Zyvara, his voice quieter now. "What happens next? For you, I mean." Zavara hesitated, her gaze shifting to the horizon. I will send a signal to my people. They will retrieve me. And the prototype, he asked. Is destroyed, she said. The raiders will not claim it. He nodded, his chest tightening. That's good. That's really good. She stepped closer, her golden eyes searching his face. And you? What will you do? Ronan shrugged, though the gesture felt hollow. Probably go back to my quiet little life. Fix some machines, talk to no one, you know. My usual. Zybara smiled faintly. I think you are capable of more than that, Ronan. Yeah, well, you're biased, he said, his voice tinged with humor. Her smile faded, replaced by a solemn expression. You could come with me. He blinked, the words catching him off guard. What? My people value resourcefulness, she said. And you have proven yourself. You could find a place among us. Ronan stared at her, his mind racing. The thought of leaving everything he knew was overwhelming, but so was the idea of staying here, in the silence he had once craved, but now found suffocating. I don't know if I'd fit in with your people, he said finally. I'm not exactly a team player. Zavara stepped closer, her hand brushing against his. You are more than you believe, Ronan, and I would be honored to stand by your side. His throat tightened, and he found himself unable to speak. Instead, he took her hand in his, squeezing it gently. The cold air swirled around them, but in that moment, it didn't matter. I guess it's worth a shot, he said, his voice quiet but steady. Zavara smiled, her golden eyes shimmering. Then let us face the stars together. As they stood on the ridge, the snow glistening beneath the rising sun, a faint hum filled the air. Zivara's signal had been answered. A sleek, silver craft descended from the sky, its design elegant and otherworldly. Ronan glanced at her, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. Ready? She asked, her voice soft. He nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. Yeah, let's go. Hand in hand, they stepped toward the ship, leaving behind the frozen wasteland and the ghosts of their pasts.